The text message came at 7:14 in the morning. I had just poured my first cup of coffee, the one I take in my favorite floral mug, sitting by the kitchen window where the morning light makes everything look gentler. It buzzed on the counter. I reached over, expecting a grocery reminder or a note from my neighbor about the church bake sale. But no, it was from my husband, Robert. "Margaret, I'm off to Brooklyn with Tiffany. She's 19. I've already emptied our joint account though. Take care of yourself." First, I thought it was some kind of sick joke. Robert had never been a poet, but this? A breakup via text after 48 years of marriage. And Tiffany, a girl young enough to be our great-granddaughter? I just stared at the words. My fingers felt cold even though the coffee steamed in my hands. For a second, I almost dropped the mug. Not because my 82-year-old heart couldn't take it, but because I realized something. Something that made the corners of my lips twitch into the faintest smile. I typed my response slowly, each word deliberate. Take care. No begging. No crying. No accusations. Just 2 words. And while Robert thought he'd just crushed the old blonde grandma who once made him turkey pot pies and knitted his socks, he had no idea he had already stepped right into a trap I had set without even knowing I'd set it. Because there were things Robert didn't know about me. Things I'd never told him. About the accounts he didn't have access to, about the lawyer's visits he never asked about the quiet decisions I'd been making while he thought I was just doing crossword puzzles. I suppose I should introduce myself. My name is Margaret Lewis, 82 years old, retired high school English teacher from a little town outside Albany, New York. I'm the kind of woman most people overlook at the grocery store, pushing my cart with coupons in hand, hair neatly pinned, cardigan buttoned all the way up. But behind that cardigan, I've got a spine that's been tempered by a lifetime of raising 3 boys, burying 2 of them, and staying married to a man who thought fidelity was optional. Robert wasn't always this way. When I married him, he was charming in that boyish, awkward way. Sandy hair, deep laugh, the kind of man who'd dance with you in the kitchen when a Frank Sinatra song came on. But over the years, something hardened in him. Maybe it was his construction business doing well. Maybe it was the younger women who started smiling at him. Maybe it was the way he liked being called boss a little too much. And me. Stayed. Through the little lies. Through the business trips that came with no receipts. Through the nights he came home smelling of perfume that wasn't mine. Until the morning that text arrived. I sat there at my kitchen table, the phone still in my hand, the steam from my coffee curling into the air like a question mark. My hands didn't shake. My breathing didn't quicken. In fact, I felt calm. Because Robert had just made the mistake of his life. You see, 3 months earlier, I'd started noticing strange transactions in our joint account. Withdrawals at odd hours, little charges adding up. Robert was never subtle, and after nearly half a century, I could read him like a well-worn novel. So I'd gone to my bank. I remember the young man behind the counter looking at me like I was someone's sweet grandma. But when I told him I wanted to transfer my share into a different account, one Robert couldn't touch, he hesitated. "Mrs. Lewis, are you sure?" I was sure. So by the time Robert thought he had emptied our joint account that morning, all he had really taken was what I'd left behind. A decoy. Just enough to make him think he'd cleaned me out. But here's the thing, I didn't react right away. Instead, I finished my coffee, washed the mug, and set it neatly back in the cupboard. I fed the cat, watered my African violets, and went about my day as if my marriage hadn't just ended in a text message. Because I knew that my silence would make him nervous. And I wanted him nervous. The calls started that afternoon. First from his sister, then from his business partner. Then from an unknown number I was certain was Tiffany herself. I ignored them all. By evening there were 15 missed calls from Robert. His last voicemail was shaky, almost angry. "Margaret, call me back. We need to talk." This isn't how I wanted it to go. Smiled. No, Robert, this was exactly how I wanted it to go. I could have stopped there. I could have stayed in my little house, kept my secret accounts, and let him rot in Brooklyn. But the longer I thought about it, the more I realized, no, I wanted him to understand what it felt like to lose everything. Because for decades, I had been the quiet, forgiving wife. The woman who kept the home together while he played successful businessman. But that morning's text, that was the last straw. And I had just the way to make him see it. It would start small with one phone call. To someone Robert never wanted to deal with. I picked up my phone, dialed the number, and when the voice on the other end answered, I said, "It's Margaret Lewis. I think we have mutual business concerning Robert. And I'm ready to talk." The person on the other end laughed. Slow, dangerous, and knowing. "Oh, Mrs. Lewis. I've been waiting for this call." The voice on the other end of the line belonged to Carla Martinez. To most people in our town, she was nothing more than a name whispered in corners, the business shark who could smell weakness a mile away. To Robert, she was something worse. His oldest, fiercest rival. They had been competing construction contractors for over 20 years, both clawing for the same government contracts, both willing to undercut and outmaneuver the other. Carla didn't play nice, and Robert had made her enemies list years ago. I had met her once, at a Chamber of Commerce dinner. She wore a fitted black suit, red lipstick, and a stare so direct you felt like she could see through your skin. Robert had pulled me away from her so quickly that I barely got to finish my glass of wine. Now she was chuckling in my ear like we were old friends. "You finally ready to take him down, Mrs. Lewis?" she asked. I took a slow breath. "I'm ready to give you something you want. In exchange for something I want." A pause then. "Go on." I told her about the files I'd found in Robert's office. Old project blueprints, backdoor dealings with city inspectors, invoices that didn't add up. I had kept them tucked away for years, thinking I'd never have a reason to use them. But now they felt like gold in my hands. "Margaret," she said, her tone shifting from amused to razor-sharp, "if those documents are as juicy as you say, I can make sure Robert's name is mud in every boardroom from here to New Jersey." "Good," I said. "And in return I want his name and Tiffany's, dragged through the mud so thoroughly that he can't show his face in Brooklyn or back home. I want him stripped of his company, his money, and his pride." Carla laughed again. "Oh, sweetheart, you're speaking my language." That night I didn't sleep much. Not because I was upset. No, I was exhilarated. It had been years since I'd felt this kind of fire in my chest. I kept picturing Robert in some tiny Brooklyn apartment, sitting on a thrift store couch with Tiffany, smug in the belief that I was somewhere crying into my pillow. Little did he know, I was planning his professional obituary. The next morning I drove into town, hair neatly set, pearl earrings in place, and slid an envelope across Carla's desk. Inside were 50 pages of Robert's dirty laundry. She leafed through them slowly, her painted nails tapping the paper. When she was done, she looked up at me and said, "You, Mrs. Lewis, are more dangerous than you look." "I know," I said. For the next week I kept my head down. I baked pies for the church fundraiser, attended my Thursday bridge game, and pretended nothing had changed. But behind the scenes, Carla's legal team was working like a pack of wolves. Within days, the whispers started in town. Contracts being re-evaluated, inspectors reviewing past projects, and one of Robert's biggest clients pulling out of a $1 million deal. Robert called again. This time I answered. "Margaret, what's going on?" "They're coming after my licenses. The city's investigating me." "What the hell did you do?" I smiled so wide I thought my cheeks would split. "Oh, Robert. You emptied the wrong account." "What are you talking about?" he barked, his voice rising. But before I could answer, I heard a high-pitched giggle in the background. Tiffany's voice. She asked him something about sushi, and he mumbled back to her. My smile disappeared. Because I realized, Robert wasn't scared enough yet. Not nearly. That's when I decided it was time to take the next step. The one thing Robert valued more than money was his reputation. And I knew just the person who could help me destroy that. It wasn't Carla this time. No, this time I needed someone who could tell a story and make it stick. Someone who could make the internet fall in love with the poor, abandoned grandma, who had been left for a 19-year-old. I dialed another number. The woman on the other end answered with a soft, warm voice. "Mrs. Lewis. Oh, I've heard about what happened. How can I help? And I told her. Every detail. Every betrayal. Every laugh he'd shared with Tiffany at my expense. Her reply was gentle, but with an undercurrent of steel. Then let's make sure the whole country hears about it. 3 days later, Robert's story, my story, was on the front page of the local paper. Then it hit social media. The headline was brutal. 82-year-old wife abandoned for teen girlfriend. Husband faces investigations into shady deals. By nightfall, it was on a Brooklyn community forum. The comments were ruthless. People calling him a predator, a cheat, a disgrace. Some even claimed to have dirt of their own to share. Robert called me that evening. I could barely hear him over Tiffany screaming in the background. "Margaret, you need to call this off," he shouted. "Call what off, Robert?" Asked sweetly. "Everything. The articles, the posts. People are showing up at the apartment." I let the silence hang just long enough for him to squirm. "Oh, Robert, I'm just getting started." And that was the truth. Because while he was panicking over the bad press, I had already set in motion the one move that would take him out completely. It involved someone even he wouldn't dare cross. Someone whose name alone could end his career in a single phone call. And I had that phone number. I stared at the number in my palm like it was a match I could strike against the whole dry forest of Robert's life. His name was Frank Delaney, head of the Capital District Building Trades Council. Around here, men in hard hats could bring a city to its knees with a single phone call from Frank. He'd been to our home once, years back, to drop off a scholarship letter for the trades program. He had hands like split oak and eyes that didn't blink when he asked questions. Robert always turned meek when Frank was in the room, like a dog suddenly remembering its leash. "Dialed. Delaney," a voice rumbled. "Mr. Delaney," I said, keeping my tone as steady as the kitchen table beneath my fingers. "This is Margaret. Margaret Lewis. Robert's wife." A heartbeat of silence, then a soft recognition. "Mrs. Lewis. Heard some talk. You all right?" "I'm fine," I said, and surprised myself by meaning it. "But I have information you'll want. About job site safety, misclassified labor, and cash envelopes that traveled in brown lunch sacks." There was no gasp, no curse, no theatrics. Just a sharpened quiet. "Where are you?" "Home," I answered. "And I can be at your office in 20 minutes. "Make it 10, he said and hung up. Smiled. 10 it was. I put on my navy cardigan and the pearl studs Robert bought me the year our middle boy graduated basic training. They caught the morning light when I passed the mirror, but the blue of my eyes, my one vanity, looked clearer than I'd seen them in years. It's odd what betrayal can do. It doesn't just bruise. Sometimes it polishes. On the drive into town, I passed the diner where Robert used to nurse coffee and brag with other contractors. 2 pickups idled there, and a pair of men outside stared down at their phones, then up at me, then back at their screens. The story was still spreading like a brush fire, and the smoke had reached every porch. Frank's office sat over a locksmith on Lark Street, stairs so steep I felt them in my knees. He stood when I entered, 6 foot something, shoulders like a shed door, and he offered his hand like we were about to sign a treaty. "Mrs. Lewis," he said. "Frank," I answered because formality felt silly now. We didn't waste time. I unzipped my cloth tote and slid out a ledger, a flash drive, and 3 stapled packets. The ledger was old school. Dates, first names, hours that never showed up on payroll. The drive held scans of change orders Robert never filed with the city. The packets, those were emails I'd printed from a forgotten account he'd used years ago, where he wrote things he should have said only to his confessor. Frank flipped, scanned, underlined with a carpenter's pencil. "He paid guys cash off the books on the Bridgeview project," he muttered, almost to himself. "Cut the overtime too. And this is a second set of inspection photos." He nodded. "The ones he used to prove a pour cured properly after they tore up the first slab. Those photos are from a different site. Look at the wall seam. It's the old mill, not the new transit hub." Frank blew out through his nose. the way men do when fury tries to climb their throat. This goes to the state, not just city inspectors. And the unions won't like what he did to those apprentices. Good, I said and folded my hands so he wouldn't see them tremble. A leftover tremble, not fear, more like the body catching up with victory. He set the papers down gently, as if they might explode. With your permission, I'll call in a few favors. Safety stops. Compliance audits. If even half of this sticks, his crews won't touch a city job for the next 10 years. My permission, I said. And my blessing. Frank nodded once. There's something else you ought to do. He slid me a business card. Granite Surety E. Chen, Senior Underwriter. All his bigger contracts sit on performance and payment bonds. If the surety gets spooked, they'll pull the line. No bond, no work. No work, no company. The words fell like bricks into place. Pocketed the card. And Mrs. Lewis, he added softer. You need a ride home? Smiled. I can still drive, Frank. Didn't doubt it, he said, and the corner of his mouth tugged like a secret smile. Back in my kitchen I brewed chamomile. Not because I needed calm, but because the ritual made the next move feel civilized. I dialed the number on the granite surety card. Chen, a crisp voice answered. Miss Chen, I said. I'm calling about the contractor Lewis and Sons. Pause typing. We underwrite their line. Who is this? Margaret Lewis, I said, and let my name do its work. I have documentation you'll want before you renew anything. And a heads up that regulatory inspections may escalate. Underwriters don't gasp either. They lay traps with questions. What kind of documentation? She asked. The kind that calls into question site safety, materials compliance, and accurate payroll reporting. The kind that puts the principal into default if it's substantiated. Click of tongue against teeth. Email it to the address on the card. Your relationship to the principal is noted. And Mrs. Lewis, thank you. You're welcome, I said. One more thing. If he tries to move assets under the company into personal hands, or vice versa, you should watch the timing against any claims. I will, she said, and the line went quiet. I sent what I had. Then I closed my laptop and stood there, hands on the counter, feeling the tremor fade completely. Outside, a pair of high school boys biked past, whooping. Somewhere a lawnmower coughed awake. The world went on, as if a marriage hadn't died that week. As if a woman past 80 couldn't touch the levers that could stop a man's machines cold. I set my phone face down and tried not to think of Tiffany's laugh, or the way Robert used to toss his keys into the bowl and kiss my cheek without looking. Memory is a stubborn housemate. You can't evict it, only rearrange the furniture. I wiped the counter. I watered the violets. And finally, because grief and strategy share the same room, I cried a little. All quiet, no drama, the way I learned to cry when the boys were young and the walls were thin. By evening, my neighbor Joan knocked, casserole in hand, pity already softening her voice. Saw the article, Maggie. You want me to stay a while? Almost said no. But some battles require witnesses. Stay, I said, and I made 2 plates though neither of us really ate. She listened as I told her about Frank, about Ms. Chen, about the ledger I'd kept not out of malice but habit. I taught boys who pocketed cheat sheets and swore they didn't, I told her. You learn to keep the dates straight. Joan reached for my hand. You're scaring me in the best way, she whispered. Do you need me to move my car to block your driveway? In case he shows. I pictured Robert's truck, loud and red and ridiculous, across my neat hydrangeas. Not yet, I said. But soon. At 9:30, my phone pulsed with an unknown Brooklyn number. I let it go to voicemail, then listened on speaker so Joan could hear. A girl's voice, breathy and practiced. Mrs. Lewis? Hi, it's Tiffany. Could you call me back? I think there's been a misunderstanding. We stared at each other until Joan snorted. She thinks you're the customer service desk, she said. Called back. Hi, Tiffany, I said when she answered. What can I do for you? Hesitation. I'm just concerned. People online are saying things that aren't fair. They're calling me names. People can be cruel, I said. Especially when they see a picture that looks like a riddle answered too easily. I'm not a riddle, she snapped. Then softer. He said you'd be okay. He said you've got your own money. I'm fine, I said because I was. But Tiffany, I don't think you called to check on me. She exhaled. I could hear a television somewhere in her apartment, a sitcom laugh track marching on without mercy. He's angry, she said finally. He's throwing things. The phone, the remote. He says someone's trying to ruin him. He says you did this. I let the silence be her mirror. He also said, she faltered. He also said if I hadn't told him about the joint account, he wouldn't have. She cut herself off like she'd walked into a glass door. Never mind. There it was. The confession slipped out. The little knife she didn't know was sharp. I felt nothing, not jealousy, not rage. Just a cold sort of pity. Tiffany, I said gently, do you know what a surety bond is? A what? Never mind, I said. Do me a favor. If anyone knocks tonight and asks for Robert, tell him not to run. Is someone going to knock? She asked, her voice small. We'll see, I said, and hung up before care could creep in. The next morning brought a new tremor, this time from the ground itself. A city inspector had posted a red stop work placard on Robert's transit hub site. A photo of it bloomed on Facebook before breakfast, the placard crimson as a wound. By 10, Ms. Chen emailed, we will be conducting a review of the principal's bonded projects. Effective immediately, we are suspending additional bond issuance pending outcome. I didn't cheer. I warmed my hands around my mug and whispered, all right. By noon, Frank texted me a photo of a crew clustered at a fence line, reading, you lit the fuse, Mrs. L, he wrote. Now step back. I tried to step back. I really did. But at 2 o'clock the doorbell rang, and when I opened it, Detective Alvarez stood there with his hat in his hand and a kindness in his face that made me wary. Mrs. Lewis, he said. Mind if I come in a second? Of course, I said, because refusing a detective only looks good in movies. He glanced at the violets, at the photographs on the mantel. 3 boys in uniform. Robert in a tux 30 years and a lifetime ago. Me with blonde hair let down for once, laughing at something I can't remember. He took a seat and notepad emerged like a magician's scarf. I won't waste your time, he said. We've received a complaint about identity fraud involving your joint account. Blinked. From whom? He offered a diplomatic half-shrug. From your husband. Joan's words about blocking the driveway floated back and made me want to laugh in a way that wasn't funny. Detective, I said. My husband emptied what he believed was our joint account after informing me via text that he was leaving for Brooklyn with a 19-year-old. I replied, take care. He took that as consent for theft, apparently. May I see the text, he asked. I handed him the phone. He read. His jaw shifted. All right, he said and wrote. I'm also going to be transparent. We're looking into some permitting irregularities triggered by a whistleblower hotline call. That's separate from me, but it's making my captain cranky. Detective, I said, leaning forward over my folded fingers like a Sunday school teacher with a lesson. Would a ledger showing off-book payments help your colleagues with their cranks? He looked up slowly. You have one. I keep records, I said. He didn't touch the tote I set between us like an offering. Ma'am, if I take that, it's evidence. It could become public. I thought of Tiffany's breathy voice, of Robert's truck, of 4 decades of second chances handed out like Halloween candy. Let it, I said. He took the tote, carefully, respectfully, like it contained a child's ashes. You've been very helpful. I know, I said, and stood so he'd know we were done. The door he paused. One more question. Is there anywhere your husband might hide cash or documents if he felt the walls closing in? The answer came fast, muscle memory. The storage unit off Route 9, second row, Unit 23. The lock has a tiny scratch shaped like a crescent. That's how he spots it. Alvarez made a note. That's very specific. I met his eyes until he understood. I was married to him for 48 years. He tipped his hat, almost old-fashioned. We'll be in touch. Twilight fell blue and slow across the kitchen tiles. I didn't turn on the overhead. I like the house dim at that hour, like a stage waiting for the curtain. The phone buzzed again. A text from an unsaved number. You think you're clever. It read. You think Facebook can save you. I didn't respond. Let him feed himself to his echo. At 8, another text. Answer me or I swear I'll come up there and what? He didn't say because I didn't give him the stage. I set the phone face down and touched the violet's leaves with a mercy I could not muster for him. Then, just as the kettle began to sing, headlights splashed across my living room. Bright. Too bright. A truck door slammed, the sound meaner than it had to be. Gravel crunched like a threat. I didn't peek. I crossed to the front hall and slid the chain across the door. My hands were steady. My breath was even. 60 seconds later, knuckles hammered the wood. Maggie, he bellowed. That voice I knew even in sleep. Open this damn door. The kettle's whistle shrieked from the kitchen like a choir boy off key. I ignored both and flicked on the porch light. Through the ripple glass, his shape loomed, broad shoulders in a leather jacket, baseball cap pulled low. Older. Smaller. Somehow both. I'm not opening the door, Robert, I said, loud enough for the wood to carry it clean. You ruined me, he shouted. You and that woman lawyer and those union thugs. You think you won. You think the old bat won. I smiled then, for me alone. I think consequences finally found you a map. His fist hit the door again, hard enough to shiver my picture frames. Let me in. We're talking like adults. We've never done that, I said and almost laughed. Then his voice changed, the pitch slipping, a whine beneath the rage. They froze everything, he said, words skidding. The bonds, the lines of credit. Tiffany's gone to her sister's. I went to the unit, there were police. What did you? Headlights washed the wall again, brighter, colder. Not one car. Then 3. Blue and red strobed into my quiet living room, painting my lace curtains a feverish purple. Robert's pounding stopped. The night held its breath like a child hiding behind a couch. Out on the gravel, doors opened. Radios crackled, polite and final. A voice like winter cut through the air. Robert Lewis? Albany County Sheriff's Office. We have questions about company records and a court order you're in violation of. Hands where we can see them. He didn't move. I could feel his panic from 6 feet and a wall away, a heat wave through the glass. I slid my fingers to the chain and rested them there, not to open but to feel the metals calm. Margaret, he said, softer now, an old echo of our kitchen dances. Please. I looked at the chain. My steady hand. At the violets, sitting prim on the sill as if the world weren't changing in my driveway. Then the knock came again. Not his. A measured, official thud-thud-thud that made the bones in the house listen. Mrs. Lewis, a voice called. Sheriff's office. May we speak with you? I took a breath, and another, and reached for the deadbolt. The chain was still in my fingers when from the yard came the sound of a boot scuff, a command half-barked, and Robert's voice breaking into a wordless, furious sound. The old dog discovering the leash was a noose. I turned the knob. And as the door began to open, a hand. His shot through the gap, fingers grabbing, desperate, and the chain went taut with a sound like a violin string about to snap. The chain held, but his fingers dug in like he thought sheer stubbornness could turn back everything closing in on him. Robert! I snapped, my voice sharper than I'd heard it in years. Let go before you regret it. Margaret, you don't know what they'll do. His words tumbled fast, panicked. They've got it all wrong, just talk to them. Tell them it's a misunderstanding. I could see the shadow of the sheriff's deputies behind him now, their flashlights bouncing off the siding. The chain rattled as he tried to push the door farther open. One of the deputies barked. Sir, step back from the door. Robert, I said again, low and deliberate. You made your bed in Brooklyn. Don't drag it into my house. His grip faltered just enough for me to slam the door shut. The sound echoed through the hallway, and for a moment I just stood there, palm against the wood, breathing in the smell of my own safety. Outside, the deputies closed in. "Sir, turn around. Hands behind your back." There was shuffling, the heavy metallic snap of cuffs, and then Robert's voice, low, angry, with a thread of desperation I'd never heard from him before. "You're making a mistake. My wife, she set this all up." The deputy answered flatly. "Then you can explain it downtown." I didn't watch them put him in the cruiser. Instead, I went to the kitchen and poured my tea, finally letting the kettle's long-cooled water wash over the chamomile bag. My hands were steady. That, more than anything, told me the power had shifted. From the front window, I caught the brief flash of Robert's profile as the patrol car pulled away. Jaw tight, cap brim low. Tiffany's voice wasn't there this time. Maybe she'd learned not to be seen. As the blue and red lights disappeared, a knock sounded at the door again. I opened it this time to find Detective Alvarez standing there. His face caught between apology and grim satisfaction. "Sorry for the commotion, Mrs. Lewis," he said. "We had probable cause to pick him up tonight. The bond suspension sped things along." I tilted my head. "And the storage unit?" His smile was small but telling. "Let's just say it's going to keep a lot of forensic accountants busy for a while." Alvarez stepped inside briefly, his boots leaving damp prints on my rug. "I should warn you," he continued. "Once we process him, his lawyers might try to spin this as a vendetta." "Let them," I said. "Truth has a way of leaving better bruises than lies." He studied me for a moment before nodding. "Most folks in your position are still in shock right now." "Oh, I was in shock," I said. "Back when I first realized he'd been making me the fool for years. Tonight is just housekeeping." After he left, the house settled into its nighttime quiet. The ticking clock in the living room, the soft hum of the refrigerator. I wandered through the rooms, touching the back of the couch, the edge of the mantel, the frame of a photograph where Robert and I were much younger, smiling into the camera like we could see forever ahead of us. I didn't feel triumph, not yet. Just the heavy relief of a door that's finally been closed after banging in the wind too long. The next morning my phone lit up before sunrise. "Carla's name. Heard the news," she said. "Your husband's face is all over the trades bulletin. They're calling him the ghost contractor now. Projects vanishing overnight." I let out a small laugh. "How poetic." "Poetic," she agreed. "And the city's pulling every permit they can find. Won't be a corner of the industry he can walk into without someone spitting at his boots." "Good," I said simply. But Carla's voice took on a different edge. "Margaret, you should know. Men like Robert don't go down easy. If he makes bail, he's going to come looking for someone to blame. And you're right at the top of that list." By noon I got another call. This one from Ms. Chan at the surety company. "Mrs. Lewis, we've frozen all remaining accounts tied to his projects. But he's been calling our office nonstop. He knows you were the source." "Let him know I'm not afraid," I said. "Careful," she warned. "Angry men with nothing left can be unpredictable." That night, as I was locking the back door, a shadow passed across my driveway. My heart gave one hard thump, then steadied as I spotted Joan's old Buick pulling in. She came to the door carrying a pie. "Pecan, still warm. Figured you could use a little sweetness with all the headlines," she said. We ate it at my kitchen table, the light low, and Joan kept glancing toward the window. "What?" finally asked. She swallowed. "Just thought I saw headlights earlier. Not sure if it was the deputies or..." She didn't finish. She didn't have to. 'Cause deep down I knew. Robert wouldn't stay caged for long, not if he could scrape together bail money. And when he came back, it wouldn't be for conversation. When Joan left, I checked the locks twice, drew the curtains, kept the hall light on. And just as I was about to turn in, my phone buzzed. No caller ID. Just a single voicemail. His voice low and venomous. "You think you've won, Maggie. But you haven't seen what I've got left. A chill went through me, not because I believed him, but because I knew Robert well enough to understand one thing. He wouldn't bluff this late in the game. And whatever he had left, it was coming straight for me. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid. Not exactly. But because I knew Robert's words weren't idle. After 48 years, I could hear the difference between his bluster and his promise. This was a promise. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. I sat in my armchair with a blanket over my knees, a cup of lukewarm tea in my hands, and my phone on the side table. If he came, I wanted to be awake to meet him, not startled out of sleep. By 2 a.m., the house was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional pop of the wood settling. My mind wandered to the storage unit Alvarez had mentioned, wondering what Robert had been keeping there. Money, documents, or something meant to use against me. When dawn finally crept through the curtains, I rose, put on my robe and started coffee. My bones ached from sitting too long, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. Around 8 o'clock the phone rang. The caller ID said Albany County Jail. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened, Robert's voice poured through the speaker, tight and urgent. Margaret, they gave me bail. I'm coming home. We need to talk before I go back to the apartment. Don't make this worse for yourself. Worse for myself. I almost laughed. But beneath the arrogance in his tone, I caught something else. A strange, deliberate calm. Robert was many things, but calm in defeat had never been one of them. Which meant he wasn't in defeat. Not yet. I spent the morning making calls. Carla first. He's out, I told her. Already heard, she replied. Word in the industry is he's been meeting with a few old contacts, ones who don't care much for the law. My stomach tightened. What kind of contacts? The kind who move cash without asking questions. And Margaret? She hesitated. There's a rumor he's been trying to get your signature on some papers. Don't know what for, but it smells like trouble. I thanked her and hung up, then called Detective Alvarez. He's out, Alvarez confirmed. Bail paid by an unknown third party. We're keeping an eye, but you need to be careful. If he shows up, call us immediately. The rest of the day passed slowly, my eyes drawn to every movement outside. The mailman, a neighbor walking their dog, a UPS truck idling for a moment too long at the end of the block. By late afternoon, the unease had turned into resolve. If Robert thought he could corner me in my own home, he was mistaken. I wasn't going to sit here like a target. I went into my bedroom and pulled out the fireproof box from under the bed. Inside were all the things I'd never trusted Robert with. The deed to the house in my name alone, my separate bank account statements, and one manila envelope marked private. That envelope contained the last set of photos I had from his business trips, the ones that would ruin him not just professionally, but personally, in ways Tiffany wouldn't forgive. I tucked the envelope into my tote bag. If he wanted to play his last card, I'd have mine ready. It was just past 6 when I heard it. The slow roll of tires over gravel in my driveway. I peered through the blinds and saw his red pickup, its paint dulled from years of work but still unmistakable. He got out slower than I expected, wearing his old leather jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. He didn't look like a man who had been in a cell the night before. He looked like a man on a mission. I didn't open the door. Instead, I spoke through it. You're trespassing, Robert. I'm your husband, he shot back. I have a right to be here. Not anymore, I said, my voice steady. You made sure of that in your text message. He stepped closer. We can still fix this. Sign a few papers, say this was a misunderstanding, and I'll make sure you're taken care of. I almost laughed again. Taken care of? Robert, the last time you tried to take care of me, you did it by running off to Brooklyn with a teenager and stealing what you thought was my savings. His jaw tightened. You think you're clever. But I've got proof you've been moving money behind my back. That's a crime. I didn't flinch. So is fraud, Robert. And I've got proof too. Proof that'll make Tiffany run so fast you won't even hear the door slam. For the first time his eyes flickered, just a hint, and I knew I'd struck the nerve. We stood there, the heavy wood between us, until he leaned in and said, "If you go through with this, you'll regret it." "No," I said, letting every ounce of truth fill my voice. "If I don't go through with this, I'll regret it." Before he could answer, headlights swung into the driveway. Black sedan. The door opened, and out stepped a man in a suit, tall, clean-cut, with a briefcase in his hand. Robert turned to look, his shoulders stiffening. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. The man ignored him and looked straight at my window. "Mrs. Lewis, I'm here on behalf of the court. I believe you'll want to hear this." Robert muttered something under his breath, but the man just walked toward the door, papers in hand. And that's when I knew whatever Robert's last card was, it was about to be played. And I had no idea if I was ready for the fallout. The man in the suit stopped just short of the porch steps, careful not to crowd the space between us. "Mrs. Lewis," he said in a voice that carried the calm authority of someone used to being listened to. "I'm attorney Samuel Grant, court-appointed to deliver these papers." I opened the door halfway, the chain still latched, and took in the details. The polished shoes, the faint scent of aftershave, the kind of briefcase you only carry if you expect to win. "What papers?" asked. Before he could answer, Robert stepped forward like he owned the conversation. "She doesn't need to see them," he snapped. "I'll handle it." Grant's head turned slowly toward him. "Mr. Lewis, you no longer have standing to determine that. This is between Mrs. Lewis and the court." Robert's jaw worked, but he stepped back just enough for Grant to raise the envelope in his hand. "These are a petition for emergency conservatorship over your financial and medical decisions, Mrs. Lewis," Grant said evenly. "Filed by your husband. If granted, you would lose control over your accounts, your property, and your legal autonomy." The words hit me like a cold wave. "Conservatorship," I repeated. "On what grounds?" Grant's eyes flicked to Robert. "Mr. Lewis has alleged diminished mental capacity, citing erratic behavior, unsafe decision-making, and emotional instability." His gaze returned to me, sharper now. "You have a right to contest, of course. But the hearing is in 72 hours. I looked past him to Robert, whose smirk had returned. "You see, Maggie," he said, voice dripping with smugness, "once you're under conservatorship, I can move the assets back where they belong. No more of your little games." My heart was steady, but I could feel the old anger, the decades of overlooked slights and swallowed truths, start to coil inside me. "You think you can paint me as senile?" "Yes. You've been acting crazy," he said. "Digging through old papers, calling my competitors, making deals like I'm some kind of owner. Cut in. Because I am Robert. Half of everything you've touched for 48 years is mine." Grant cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "Mrs. Lewis, I'm obligated to inform you. If you sign here acknowledging receipt, the 72-hour clock starts now. If you refuse to sign, Mr. Lewis can still proceed, but it may delay the hearing." I took the pen through the narrow door gap, signed, and handed it back. "Let's start the clock," I said. Robert frowned. "You're making a mistake." "No, Robert," I replied, sliding the door shut until the chain caught. "The mistake was thinking you could win this in a courtroom where truth still matters." That night I didn't sleep again, but this time my wakefulness was filled with planning. I pulled out the private envelope from my tote and laid the photographs across my dining table. Each one was a nail in the coffin he was building for himself. Robert at a casino in Atlantic City when he was supposedly at a city contract meeting. Robert on a yacht with Tiffany and another man whose reputation was already circling the drain. Robert handing what looked suspiciously like an envelope of cash to a site inspector behind a chain-link fence. But photographs were only the garnish. I needed testimony. Credible, unshakable. The kind that would make a judge question why Robert wasn't the one being evaluated for competency. By morning I was on the phone to two people. First, Carla. "I need you at that hearing," I told her. "And bring the documents we didn't give to Frank yet." Then, Detective Alvarez. "You still have that ledger I gave you?" "Of course," he said. "Why?" Because I want you, in uniform, in the gallery when Robert tries to tell a judge I'm not in my right mind. He chuckled low. That's going to be one hell of a morning. 2 days before the hearing, a knock came at my door again. This time it was Tiffany. She stood there in jeans and a windbreaker, makeup smeared from either tears or carelessness. "Mrs. Lewis," she began, eyes darting to the street. "I need to talk to you." I folded my arms. "About what?" "About Robert," she said quickly. He's not who I thought he was. He's been yelling all the time, throwing things, saying you ruined his life. He wants me to testify at the hearing that you've been acting unstable. And will you?" "Yes." She bit her lip, looked down. "He said if I don't, he'll tell people things about me, things that could get me in trouble." I let the silence stretch until she shifted from foot to foot. "You want my advice, Tiffany?" said finally. "Show up at that hearing. Tell the truth. The whole truth. And then get as far away from Robert Lewis as you can." She left without promising anything. But I had seen something in her eyes, a flicker of fear that wasn't about me. If she flipped, she could tip the whole case. That night, I sat at my table, arranging the evidence into neat surgical piles. Documents, photos, witness statements, and one last folder marked emergency motion, a little something my own lawyer, an old student of mine turned pit bull in heels, had prepared. The morning of the hearing, I wore my best navy suit and a pearl brooch my mother gave me. Carla was already in the hallway outside the courtroom, sharp in her black dress, and Detective Alvarez gave me a small nod from the back row. Robert arrived late, in a suit that didn't quite fit, his lawyer whispering furiously in his ear. Tiffany trailed behind him, eyes fixed on the floor. When the bailiff called the case, Robert sat tall, ready to launch his attack. The judge, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair, looked between us. "Mr. Lewis," she began, "you've petitioned for emergency conservatorship over your wife. State your case." Robert's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, Mrs. Lewis has been engaging in erratic, vindictive behavior." "Objection," my lawyer said, rising. "We have evidence these claims are retaliatory, filed only after Mrs. Lewis provided information to ongoing criminal investigations into Mr. Lewis's business." The judge raised a brow. "Is that so?" Robert started to speak, but his lawyer's hand on his arm kept him seated. And that's when my lawyer slid our first exhibit onto the judge's bench, a glossy photo of Robert on the yacht, Tiffany at his side, the city inspector holding an envelope between them. The judge's eyes narrowed. "This hearing," she said slowly, "just took a very different turn." I felt Robert's gaze on me like heat, but for the first time it wasn't triumphant. It was cornered. And I wasn't done yet. The judge's gavel tapped once, not in anger, but to regain order as the quiet rippled into whispers. "Mr. Lewis," she said, her tone measured but heavy, "you petitioned this court to take away your wife's legal autonomy, yet the first evidence presented suggests potential misconduct on your part. I'll need explanations. And they'd better be compelling." Robert's lawyer swallowed. "Your Honor, these photographs are misleading." "Misleading?" My attorney, Rachel Stein, cut in, voice like polished steel. "Would the court like to see the date and GPS metadata from the original files?" The judge leaned forward. "Proceed." Rachel tapped her laptop, and a large monitor at the side of the courtroom lit up. The photo of Robert on the yacht reappeared, this time with a timestamp, location coordinates, and a file origin from Robert's own work phone. Another click brought up the second image, Robert handing an envelope to the inspector. Both images were taken on dates when Mr. Lewis was billing the city for on-site supervision at the transit hub, Rachel continued. "Not only is this fraud, Your Honor, but it directly contradicts the mental instability narrative he's attempting to paint about my client. This is calculated retaliation, pure and simple." Robert leaned toward his lawyer, hissing something I couldn't hear. His face had gone a mottled shade of red, the kind that meant the truth was pressing against his teeth, begging to spill. The judge adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Lewis, before I consider this petition further, Do you have witnesses to support your claims about your wife's alleged instability? Robert straightened. Yes. Tiffany. He jerked his chin toward her. Please tell the judge what you told me. All eyes turned to Tiffany as she shifted in her seat. Her hands twisted in her lap. She glanced at Robert, then at me. She stopped. Look down. I can't lie, she said softly. Robert's head whipped toward her. What are you? She's not unstable, Tiffany blurted. She's sharper than anyone I've met. Robert wanted me to say she'd been forgetting things, losing her temper, but it's not true. He's the one who's been angry. And violent. Her voice cracked on the last word. Gasps fluttered through the gallery. The judge's eyes sharpened. Violent. Explain. Tiffany's gaze darted back to Robert, but she pressed on. 2 nights ago, after the article came out, he threw a chair across the apartment. Said if I didn't back him up, I'd regret it. I left and stayed with my sister. Robert lunged halfway to his feet. She's lying. Sit down, Mr. Lewis, the judge snapped, gavel cracking hard this time. Rachel seized the moment. Your Honor, I'd also like to submit a ledger provided to law enforcement by my client, detailing unreported cash payments and falsified inspection documents over a span of 12 years. Detective Alvarez rose from the back, uniform crisp, and approached the bench with a sealed evidence envelope. The judge's brow rose as she accepted it. This is already in the hands of investigators, she asked. Yes, Your Honor, Alvarez said. The state's attorney is reviewing charges. Hush fell. Robert's lawyer whispered frantically to him, but the tension in his jaw said he wasn't hearing a word. The judge set the ledger down with deliberate care. Given the evidence, I find no merit to Mr. Lewis's petition for conservatorship. In fact, the court will be forwarding these materials to the appropriate authorities for further action. I didn't smile, not outwardly. But inside there was a steady, quiet satisfaction. 48 years of swallowing my pride, of watching him chip away at my dignity. And now the balance sheet was finally tilting. Robert muttered under his breath. This isn't over, Maggie. The judge's gaze cut to him like a blade. Mr. Lewis, if you speak out of turn again, I will hold you in contempt. As the hearing adjourned, Rachel touched my arm. We're not just out of the woods. We've got him halfway into his own snare. Next step, civil damages. But before I could answer, Alvarez approached. His expression was serious. Mrs. Lewis, you should know. We got a warrant for that storage unit. What we found? He hesitated. Let's just say it's going to make the evening news. Robert froze mid-step toward the door. You went into my unit, he barked. The detective's calm was almost cruel. It's evidence now. I turned toward Robert, meeting his eyes one last time in that courtroom. I told you, Robert. The mistake was thinking you could outplay me. Back outside, the cold air bit at my cheeks. Carla was waiting, her smile fierce. You gutted him in there, she said. But whatever's in that unit, that's going to finish the job. I tightened my grip on my tote, the weight of the private envelope still inside. Good, I said. Because I want the ending to be unforgettable. Behind us, Robert's voice rose in the parking lot, shouting at his lawyer. But I didn't turn around. I'd spent too many years giving him my attention. Instead, I walked toward the car, already thinking of the headlines to come, and the way the final chapter would read when I was done. Because this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about making sure Robert Lewis never had the chance to destroy another woman's life. And I wasn't finished yet. Detective Alvarez called the next morning before sunrise. Mrs. Lewis, he said, voice clipped but laced with something I couldn't quite place, a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. You need to come down to the precinct. You're going to want to see this for yourself. By 8, I was sitting in a hard-backed chair in a small evidence room. A table stretched between me and a series of boxes stacked almost to the ceiling, each marked Unit 23, Evidence. Alvarez leaned against the doorframe. We inventoried the storage unit last night. Your husband wasn't just hiding cash. He was keeping insurance on other people. A lot of people. One box was filled with photographs. Grainy shots of city inspectors meeting with contractors in parking lots, envelopes changing hands, handshakes sealing what I knew were illegal deals. Another box held binders labeled by year, each one stuffed with copies of fake invoices, forged signatures, and off-the-books payroll sheets. But the real prize, the thing that made my breath hitch, was in a black duffel bag. Inside were stacks of cash, easily 6 figures, bound with rubber bands so brittle they crumbled when Alvarez pulled one free. "There's more," Alvarez said. He handed me a thick manila envelope. Inside was a series of handwritten letters, all in Robert's blocky scrawl, addressed to people I recognized from years of sitting through his business dinners. Men who ran everything from construction supply companies to union locals. The letters were explicit threats. If they didn't cooperate with him, certain photos or documents would be shared with interested parties. Blackmail. Pure and simple. I sat back, letting the weight of it sink in. "You're telling me, all this time he wasn't just a crook. He was collecting dirt on everyone around him." "Exactly," Alvarez said. "And now that it's in our hands, those people have no reason to protect him." I thought about Robert in that Brooklyn apartment, thinking he still had cards to play. This was his deck, and now it was scattered on the floor for anyone to pick up. By that afternoon the story had broken. The local paper ran the headline: "Contractor Robert Lewis under investigation for fraud, extortion. Wife's evidence key to case." Cable news picked it up by evening. Carla called just to laugh. "Margaret, he's finished. No one will touch him now. Not in construction, not in business, not even in a PTA meeting." But I wasn't done. There was one more thing I needed to do, something that would ensure Robert's fall was permanent. Called Rachel, my attorney. "We're filing a civil suit," I told her. "I want damages for everything, the fraud, the emotional distress, the attempted conservatorship. And I want the house in my name free and clear." She didn't hesitate. "We'll file in the morning. But you should know, with everything Alvarez has, you'll have leverage to take more than just the house." "Good," I said. "Because I'm not leaving him with a single inch of the life he thought he could steal from me." 2 days later, Robert's lawyer tried to call me twice. I didn't answer. Instead, I forwarded the calls straight to Rachel. The message came back the same both times. Robert was willing to settle. But by then, it was too late for settlements. The state had filed charges. The city had stripped his licenses. His former allies were lining up to testify, hoping to save themselves. And Tiffany. She sent me a single text. "You were right. He's not worth saving." Then she blocked my number. I never heard from her again. The final blow came during the civil hearing. Rachel stood beside me, reading out the list of damages. Behind us, the gallery was packed. Reporters, curious locals, even a few people Robert had crossed over the years. When the judge read her ruling, the room went quiet. "All properties, vehicles, and accounts held jointly are awarded in full to Mrs. Lewis. Additional damages totaling $1.2 million to be paid within 90 days. Robert didn't look at me. He just stared straight ahead, jaw tight, as if the weight of it all had finally settled on him. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt no rush of triumph, no giddy relief. Just the kind of peace that comes when you've finally finished something that's been hanging over your head for far too long. Carla met me on the courthouse steps. "So, what now?" I smiled faintly. "Now, go home, make tea, and plant more violets." That evening I sat in my kitchen, the light fading to gold through the window. The house was mine. The accounts were mine. My future, however many years were left, was mine. I poured my tea, took a sip, and let the quiet wrap around me like a familiar shawl. Robert had once told me I'd be nothing without him. Turns out, I was everything the moment I let him go. If this story reminded you that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to fight for your dignity, and to take back your life, then like, comment, and subscribe. Somewhere out there, another woman needs to know she's not alone. 3 months after the civil court ruling, My life had settled into a quiet rhythm again. Mornings began with tea in my kitchen, afternoons with tending to the violets, evenings with phone calls from old friends I'd neglected for years. The papers had stopped calling. Carla had moved on to other battles. Even Detective Alvarez had said, "It's over, Mrs. Lewis. You can breathe now." But peace can be deceiving. One Wednesday morning a letter arrived. Heavy envelope. No return address. Inside a single sheet. "Mrs. Lewis, there are things about Robert you still don't know. Call me before it's too late." No name. Just a phone number. I should have thrown it away. Instead, I set it beside my tea and stared at it until the steam went cold. That afternoon curiosity won. Dialed. A man's voice answered on the second ring. "Margaret Lewis." "Yes." "Who is this?" "My name's Alan Pierce. I used to work for your husband off the books. Owes me. And now that he's looking at prison time, he's trying to pay his debts with someone else's property." "Yours?" My stomach tightened. "What kind of property?" 2 acres of land upstate. "In your name." "He forged a quitclaim deed transferring it to a shell company last year. If he gets it sold before sentencing, you'll never see it again." Called Rachel immediately. Within an hour she had the forged deed pulled up on her screen. "Alan's telling the truth," she said grimly. "We can fight it, but we'll need to act before the sale closes." "And Margaret?" She hesitated. "The buyer's a known associate of one of Robert's less savory business contacts." The fight I thought was over had just bared its teeth again. The next day, I drove to the county clerk's office. The deed was there in black and white, Robert's signature bold and shameless, my forged signature beside it. I signed an affidavit challenging it. Rachel filed an emergency injunction, and we braced for another court date. But Robert wasn't going to wait for court. That night, as I pulled into my driveway, a figure stepped from the shadows. It was Tiffany. "We need to talk," she said, her voice urgent. "Robert's not giving up. He's telling people you stole from him, and that he's going to make you pay before he goes away." The wind bit through my coat, but it wasn't the cold that made me shiver. I knew Robert could bluff, but if Tiffany had sought me out, it meant he was serious. 3 days later I was back in court, and Robert was there too, in the same ill-fitting suit, looking thinner but still defiant. The judge heard both sides. Rachel presented the forged deed, the land records, and even called Alan Pierce as a witness. Robert's lawyer sputtered about misunderstandings and clerical errors, but the judge wasn't buying it. Her ruling was swift. The land reverted to me, the attempted sale blocked, and the forged deed referred to the district attorney for possible criminal charges. As I walked out, Robert caught my arm. His grip was weak now, but his eyes were still sharp with hate. "This isn't over, Maggie," he whispered. "You've taken everything, but I'll find a way to leave you with nothing." Pulled my arm free. "Robert, you already have nothing. You just haven't accepted it yet." That night I sat in my kitchen, looking out at the dark yard. I'd won again, but it didn't feel final. Not yet. I knew Robert. He would keep scratching at the walls until they finally closed in for good. And I intended to make sure that when they did, they left no way out. Robert's sentencing was set for a Tuesday in early spring. The courthouse was packed. Reporters, former employees, even a few of the men he used to blackmail. I sat in the second row, pearl brooch pinned to my lapel, calm as stone. The prosecutor laid it all out. Fraud, extortion, falsified records, attempted property theft. The storage unit evidence was the nail in the coffin, but the forged deed had been the hammer blow that sealed it. When the judge pronounced the sentence, 12 years without parole, a murmur ran through the room. Robert didn't look at me. He just stared at the table, hands clenched, as if he could crush the wood to dust. Side cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. I didn't stop walking until I reached my car. That night, the house was quiet again. I brewed tea, watered the violets, and opened the back door to let in the soft spring air. On the table sat the black and white photo of Robert from our wedding day. I picked it up, studied the young man he'd been, before the greed, before the lies, and then I slid it into a drawer I rarely opened. A week later, a letter arrived from the prison. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Whatever words Robert had left, they couldn't touch me anymore. Instead, I wrote my own letter. Not to him, but to the local women's shelter. I offered to fund a new legal aid program for women in abusive financial situations. Because if there's one thing I'd learned, it's that survival isn't enough. You have to make sure no one else gets trapped in the same cage you escaped from. On a warm April morning, I planted a new row of violets along the front walk. As I pressed the last one into the soil, I realized something. Robert had been wrong all along. He thought my strength was in what I tolerated. But my real strength, the thing he could never take, was in what I could end. I stood, brushed the dirt from my hands, and smiled at the quiet street. Robert Lewis was gone from my life. And I was finally completely free. If this story reminded you that you can take your life back, no matter your age, no matter how much someone has tried to take from you, like, comment, and subscribe. Someone out there needs to hear your story too.